So let's dive into treatment. And I know you talk a lot about the CBT and the exposure. So I'm going to let you lead this section because if this is what you do. So when you have a parent come in with a child, with a teen, an adult, what are the steps?
The good news is there's not one size fits all, and there are a few different ways to approach this. And I think that sensory element is really interesting because there are kind of different presentations, there are different treatments that have developed in different arenas of treatment beyond just psychology. So one route is looking at occupational therapy. An occupational therapist often helps kids and, teens and adults work through the sensory components of feeling overloaded by certain sensory information and sensory sensitivities. And that can include food. For younger kids, like infants and young children, feeding clinics are often a really great space to look for treatment because they're collaborating with a team of nutritionists and medical physicians, but also potentially speech therapists that are looking at how is your mouth shaped? How are you chewing food? So they can look at the muscle part and the structural part. But then when you start to get older, that's where the question of what is treatment? How do you do this? Starts to get a little bit murkier. And in the psychological world, there's kind of two different domains that have developed. One is the eating disorder world, which most people look at first because ARFID is considered an eating disorder. So that makes sense. Naturally, you look for an eating disorder therapist. And that can be a great route. But sometimes eating disorder treatment is very focused on what are considered the more traditional, more well-known eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia and binge eating disorder that have a very different relationship with food and often involve a desire to change body weight or shape and self-worth related to self-image and food as a part of that experience. Whereas ARFID, there's really typically not body image concerns, or if they are, it's separate from the ARFID diagnosis. It's not necessarily derived from the ARFID diagnosis. So sometimes you can find eating disorder treatment that does include ARFID work, especially at the higher level of care. If somebody has, medical needs and they need to be supervised and they need help making sure they're getting adequate intake just on a real medical level. But the other arena, which is the arena I work in, is the anxiety disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder treatment domain. And a lot of the treatments that work for OCD and anxiety disorders are really helpful for ARFID. And the big area that I work in is cognitive behavioral therapy, and a section of that is something called exposure therapy, which is where you essentially work through feelings of anxiety or distress by practicing going towards it in small, manageable ways and learning how to cope with it and challenging beliefs you might have about it or fears you might have about it, and also learning about your skills in recovering from that distress. And that can be extremely helpful for ARFID. So usually with treatment, we're trying to identify what are the things that you're dealing with when it comes to food. If it's certain textures, how can we practice going towards some of those textures in small, manageable ways where you feel confident, you're building a sense of power and agency, and you're also learning how to work through any negative or unwanted feelings that come up around it. And you get to see how it goes, because sometimes people have these predicted feelings. This is going to be horrible. I can't handle this. This is too scary. And then afterward, they get to see that they did handle it. So you're testing out some of the beliefs along the way. And sometimes people predict they don't like something, but they've never tried it before. And when they do try it, they realize they do like it. That's not everybody with ARFID, but I definitely have a subset of people who just have avoided food for so long, they don't even know what a lot of things really taste like.
Right.
But there's also, you want to identify what the core fear is. So if it's a fear of eating across settings, we want to target eating in different settings. If it's a fear of mixing foods together or having them touch, let's practice having foods touch. If it's a fear of certain flavors, let's chain different foods in together. And you see this a lot in parenting in general, where you hide a food that people don't like and you combine it with something that they do like broccoli and cheese. And then over time, you fade out the cheese and a kid is like, okay, I can handle broccoli. I don't love broccoli, but I can eat it without cheese. But if cheese gets it in there, then let's get it in the body because that still counts as nutrition.
Very interesting. When I was reading over about ARFID and about in your YouTube video, and I was like, wow, you could almost take the word selective mutism and interchange it, because my approach to selective mutism is one, understanding what the specific social communication challenges are and what their whys are. But the social communication bridge breaks down communication into steps. It's nonverbal, transitional, and the different aspects that can then be broken down to verbal. quiet 1 or 2 words to regular volume, elaborative, initiative. You break it all down. So you're doing the same thing and using feelings. I'm really big with using feelings, and kids create their 0 to 3 scale for little guys and the 0 to 5 scale for older kids, teens, and adults, where we trust their feelings. We build that connection of trust, because we can't do this, do that, and talk to them that way. It's kind of a collaborative. It's a collaborative interaction with them. It's valuing their feelings without shaming them and trusting their feelings. And when you really build that trust of what their fears are, in this case with the different eating aspects and the different worries they have, it's no different than with selective mutism. Obviously strategies change, right, based on their needs, but it's the same thing. So I love that. And you were talking about like you change one variable at a time. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. And it is that stepped approach of we want to set manageable, achievable goals and take our comfort zone and just take one step outside of it and let the comfort zone adjust. And then take another step outside of it and let the comfort zone adjust. And now we have a comfort zone that's 2 steps bigger. And we didn't have to jump very far to get there. You just have to do it one step at a time and help somebody feel like they have agency and power in that process, that they're being listened to and acknowledged and their fears are supported, and but also being encouraged to step outside of those fears or face those fears. And so one way I like to do this in a stepwise fashion is, if you don't feel like you can eat a piece of food, how can we just be around it? Can you touch it? All right, we're going to hold it. We're going to play with it. We're going to mess with it. Now, can you smell it? Can you lick it? Can you hold it in your mouth and spit it out? Can you hold it in your mouth for 5 seconds and then spit it out? And we always set up a plan beforehand and we stick with that plan. It's not we do something until you can't take it anymore, because that tends to reinforce the fear and distress associated with that experience. Instead, we want to always end on a win, and we want to follow through on what our goal is. And that plays into rescuing with parents, because if you suddenly change the goal halfway through and you rescue a kid that is distressed, you are telling that kid, you can't do this. You
Right.
should be afraid. And also, if you get upset enough, we don't have to do it at all.
Right.
You can avoid it forever. So this is the piece of, we want to set piecemeal manageable goals. And if you struggle, maybe we can go back a step, but we're not going to avoid it altogether.
So do you create various game charts and charts for the kids so they know what, when, and where? Because that's a big part of treating selective mutism, in my opinion, is giving the control to that individual struggling. So they know what, when, where, and how, and that control and understanding fuels them.
Yes. I usually, before I do any exposure, we set up exactly what the plan is, what the set end, beginning and end are, what feeling you're practicing staying with, and what you're going to do to fulfill that. And also, what are you going to be rewarded with at the end? If it's a kid, I always want to reward somebody for trying, not succeeding, but for trying, because
Right.
that's the thing we're trying to encourage, is facing that disgust or discomfort and working through it versus having to do it well. That's not the key here. But often with games, I love games, especially with kids and teens, to be honest, and adults. Adults love games too.
Yeah,
Is
we love Dave.
I want them to be in charge of it. They design it. They are the one choosing what the exposures are. And then it's not just me telling them what to do, which a lot of people have experienced food as somebody else demanding that. And there's a lot of expectations and a lot of pressure to do it a certain way. And then they're in treatment because somebody else told them to be there, especially if it's kids. But if they can choose what the game is going to be, what the rules are, I don't care if the rules make sense. With kids, the rules don't make any sense. They usually tell me how a game works, and I'm like, all right, that's not how this is played, but this is what you said, so we're going to play it that way. And
Yeah.
apparently you're the winner every single time, and that's fine with me, because it's not about the game. It's about what helps you feel like you have some say in it, some participation in it, and then you know exactly how it's going to go. So if it's every 2 moves you take a bite, or every time you get a match in this card game you take a bite, now you know what the expectations are, and it's not going to change. It's not a moving target. And I like to give them the choice to say no to things, and it's not going to be penalized, that's going to be respected. But if they go towards something, then they can earn something. So it's more, if you do this, then you can earn this thing. If you
Right.
don't do it, that's totally fine. That's your choice. You don't have to do it. But how can we sweeten the deal a little bit? Because I'm asking you to do something that's horrible. So
Yeah.
what do you want to get out of this experience?
Right. And using their feelings to rate and grade. The external motivation for the younger folks definitely works. But what I find is, and I'm sure you do too with this and the anxieties disorders you treat, is that as they get older, their buy-in is tougher, but it also we're very dependent on them now. Whereas younger folks, it's the parent changes where the child makes the changes. But as they age, as you know, their internal motivation has to play a role. So
Mhm.
how do you deal with some of the teens and adults where their family members are like, look, this is an issue, and they're like, leave me alone, I don't want to do this? Or do you find that these other reasons of the social consequences, the medical consequences, that's enough for a lot of the teens and adults? What do you find with that internal motivation playing a role?
Teens and adults are my favorite. That is who I'm usually working with. I actually don't work as much with kids as I do with teens and adults. And because they have some agency, because they have some say, and because they're often able to recognize those higher order goals. And for teens, it's probably less nutrition and more the social element or being able to travel. And just to put it in context, I work with a lot of teens who will travel and not be able to eat anything the whole time. I had one teen that went on a trip with their family and only ate string cheese from Starbucks the entire time. It could only be from Starbucks. So that's part of the piece of ARFID that looks a little more on the obsessive compulsive domain and why those treatments are helpful of can we practice eating string cheese from somewhere else and how do we work through that? But as a result, they got really constipated. And
Yeah,
that's
I
a
was just
feeling
going
they
to
didn't
say, wow.
that nobody wants to experience that. And so in the moment when they're struggling, helping them remember what their higher order goals are. Because it's really hard to eat something that's disgusting and be like, yeah, I'm going to think about all the ways this is going to add to my life. Usually there's just this gut reaction of, nope, I don't want to do this. This is awful. I can't. And so we revisit, okay, what can you do? And also, what are your personal goals? So with teens in particular, I usually review that at the top of the session of what are your goals? Why are we doing this? So that they can remember that they're the ones that said it. It's not here because I want them to eat stuff. We're here because they want to be able to eat stuff. What can they get out of it? And then just kind of reminding them of their past successes as well can help them feel confident and like they can go towards things when they have the hard moment in session. And then I give them homework between sessions and they can come back and tell me like I did this and this was great and I had this hard challenge and I worked through it. So it's them being reminded of what they're hoping to get out of it. But usually they're able to identify those larger goals.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. I can see that. That's, obviously the same thing. What are your goals? And even if they can't accomplish them yet, at least that we're getting them to think about what they might want to do and how that will help in their life.